the underrated for the married and those that are contemplating marriage. Of course, ground rules first. You have to always remember that viewers' discretion is always advised. And the very, very important rule is that this particular discourse, that is the underrated, everything that we're going to be dealing with here is premised and based on the Christian biblical principles to which I subscribe. If I'm held accountable, I'm held accountable on those particular principles. And that's the whole idea of me coming onto this platform to share some of those nuggets that I believe will add value to you if you do care to just sit for a while. It's going to be a very short one. And as you can remember, in the introductory episode, we talked about quite a number of things. And in particular, we laid down the foundation, the scriptural foundation, about the fact that the two are better than one. But then when we went further into the New Testament, the Bible teaches us that, and the two shall become one, and they shall no longer be two, but one flesh. And that's the biblical foundation on which this discourse is going to be aligned to. And having said that, in this particular episode, I want to talk to two groups of people before I go to the third group of people. The first two groups of people that I want to talk about those that are not married yet, that have not been thinking about it. Maybe if you were thinking about it, you have not really thought that deep about it. That's the first group. The second group is the group of those that are engaged or are in the process or are contemplating getting married. So these two are not married yet. So it's very important that we draw that particular distinction. So I'm going to start by just laying this foundation on the basis of the fact that, as I said in the previous episode, that marriage, it's not an event. That marriage, it's not a recreational thing. That marriage is the very genesis of family. It's a very establishment of a family. You know what we say when we say charity begins at home, and when the society has to be, corrected for whatever, family has to be the ground where some of these values that we espouse as the society, to see our society a better society. Now, marriage is right at that particular foundation. I do not see, at least as I said, from the Christian principles that I subscribe to, I do not see the role of the family not being included in trying to solve many ills that are affecting societies and the world today. So the premise there is that, therefore, marriage, by its own character, it's a lifelong covenant. I know in the previous episode I said it is a long-term commitment. Now I want to use this word covenant because that's what it is. What marriage does, it takes the meaning of agreement, the meaning of consensus, and the meaning of commitment to another level altogether. And so, therefore, it is very important. And I said I was talking to the first two groups which are not yet in the commitment. The first one being the group that is not even thinking about it. Number one, it's very, very important that you should not be pressured to be married. It's very, very important. There are many pressures that come. If your decision to want to get married is solely based on the pressure, then that on its own takes away the fact that you should be the person that makes the decision Because if pressures are making you make a decision, then you have not made the decision, but you have been pressured into a decision. The danger with that is that as time goes on and you begin to, because what pressure is really, it's really constriction. It's really just, there's no room to breathe. There's no room to be objective about things. That's loosely the meaning of what pressure is. But there will come a time, because you see, pressure, challenges, moments of, oblivion and moments of not knowing what's going on around you are but temporary, because we are living in a life that has seasons. So there will be times of pressure, and there will be times when things become clearer and things fall into perspective. Between the two times, the worst time to make a decision is when you are under pressure. The best time to make a decision is when things are clear, when you can be in a position to do the basic mathematics, the basic pros and cons, but also be in a position to know that you are ready, and you are ready as a complete human. And there are many other things that we can talk about in this particular regard, but for the purposes of keeping within time, and because this is a whole season, we are going to get into those particular things. But suffice it to say for this session that pressure, whatever kind of pressure, and I know that social media is one of the pressures that are out there, that people are really being severed on. It's one of those, but there are many others. It is not a reason for you to engage into this lifelong commitment. And having said that, before I go to point number 2, it is therefore understandable that if we could be in a position to do that, this thing that I'm saying, that make a decision when things are more clear and you can see things from an objective perspective. If we can achieve that kind of a stance, that would not be having a lot of marriages that break down halfway. And I may just add that in addition to the fact that I'll be sharing some of my own personal experiences, but as a film producer, as a filmmaker, I have actually, had a grace of being able to shoot weddings, over 20, 30 weddings that I have done, which when I look back, I still have a number of, relations and contact with a lot of the people whose weddings I have shot. And I should say that there are things that I have learned when I meet some of those 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, saying that we're still together. And I make it my business to actually find out what keeps you going strong. And it's such a beautiful thing to see. And on the other side, there are those that I get, disheartened when I realize that those have fallen apart. It's something that I do not want for anyone at this particular point in time to have to go through, because that can be very disastrous. It just affects a whole lot of things. For many people, it can push you to a constant depression, even to a point that I dare not mention on this particular session. So please be careful what season you make a decision on. The second thing that I want you to be aware of is that marriage, because we have already established that it's a lifelong commitment or lifelong covenant, it is not a fashionable thing. It's not something that becomes in, so to speak. It's not something that you do because others are doing it. It shouldn't be like that. It was not meant to be like that, because more than just being about two people, and I know that, we're living in the times where people are speaking their truths and people are, becoming themselves, and some of those things are actually worrying when you realize that after 20 years, myself, after 20 years, being with my wife, I have learned a lot of things about some of the very important ingredients in marriage that the now generation is taking out of the mix, and that on its own becomes a recipe for disaster. And I'm actually going to be going to that as the final point, the third and final point. It is very, very important that once you consider the decision, once you consider the step of making your commitment to another person serious to a point of wanting to tie that knot, let me tell you, that is a brilliant thing. That is an awesome thing. If you come to that particular space, I'm excited when I hear a person saying that I'm ready to get married. And one of the times I will explain to you just how that becomes an addition, a positive addition in your life that would have otherwise never be had you remained single. And that is why this show is about the underratedness of marriage, because I can tell you now that it is a disservice for a person like myself who has seen 2 decades in marriage and see just how beautiful it is, just how wonderful it is, just how powerful it is, and just how nurturing and growing it is in my own personal life. And the beauty of it is it can be achieved even by yourself. And for that particular purpose, that most important ingredient, never ever despise the advice of those that have been in this before you. Never despise an advice from those that have been in this before you. Advice is not the law, but it gives you a perspective from the other angle. It's for you to consider, but the worst thing that you can do is to think you've got it figured out. Remember, in marriage, you don't get qualified and get married. You have to live it to figure it out. And one of the times I'm going to be talking about, in fact, I'm going to be talking about it in this coming episode, the question of what is the best advice you can ever get about getting married, or what marriage is about. Never is the last point that I want to pause on. Never despise the advice of the elderly / those that have made it in this particular regard. If you can take time to go and seek a mentor for your career, seek a mentor for your art, or your art form, or your skill, surely in marriage, matters of marriage, it becomes 10 times even more important, because unlike any other thing, marriage is a lifelong commitment. And hence we say, for richer, for poor, and until death do us part. With those few nuggets, let me let you go, and I'll see you in the next episode. And in the meantime, everything of the best. This is The Underrated, and I'm JT Tebehadi on Focus Media SA. Until we meet again next time.